In the last few chapters, we've spent a lot of time defining three key variables. They are inflation, unemployment, and output. Output is a particularly important variable, okay? On the first day of class, we said output is an indicator of how well an economy is doing, but a better indicator is output per population. So, for example, we said that the United States has 2 times the nominal output of China, but 10 times output per capita. Okay, so per person in the country. And it's this Y over population that is the better indicator of how the country is doing, how your average Joe is doing. Let's talk about Y over pop, what that is. So specifically, let's talk about growth empirics. Y over pop can be decomposed into two submeasures. So what do I mean by that? We can write Y over pop is equal to Y over N times N over pop. Why is it valid to do this? Well, we can simply cross out the N's and see that the remainder is Y over pop still. So adding in N's is just a clever way of saying this thing can also be written as these two things. Y over N is what? It is Y over laborers. So in the preceding video, I used L a lot to mean laborers. L and N are interchangeable in the economic growth literature. So whether we use L or N, it can be either one. It can mean the same thing. If you see a problem, it'll always be defined. It'll say L is laborers or N is laborers. So don't be thrown off that we use the same notation, different notation to mean the same thing. Let's compare then this output per laborer and labor per population. Well, Y over N is a lot like Y over pop, but it just takes out all of the people who aren't working. So these are people who are in the population but not N. This includes obviously the unemployed, but this also includes people that are not in the workforce. So definitions of people who are not in the workforce are given in the chapter. We'll go into that in class. What's important about this is just to know that these empirics can be broken down into these subclasses to be more specific about what Y over pop is. Population is made up of a lot of different people, and specifically the unemployment rate has this role to play in saying what is the difference between this term and this term. Okay, now that we have an idea of what these empirics are, let's talk more about the differences in countries when it comes to how they start to grow and then why they start to slow down once they get very big. So the idea is that countries behave according to some production function. So we said in the last couple of videos having to do with labor that output was a function of L to the 1/2, and we saw that that function looks like this. Putting in more L resulted in relatively less Y for each L you put in. The idea is kind of intuitive. It's like saying once you have more people in the factory, each additional person contributes relatively less to output. We can write a similar function with capital. So capital comprises things like machines and buildings, that sort of thing. K to the 1/2 will look the same. So imagine we're talking about a developing country, okay? So there are a lot of sub-Saharan African countries that are down in the developing range, low amounts of capital. Obviously, because they have small amounts, they're going to get a lot of boom for their buck, a lot of output. But if we're talking about a developed country like the United States, adding a little bit more capital results in relatively less output. So this is why we see that stylized fact in the data. So there's a graph from the first class you can go back and look at that Smaller countries, in terms of GDP, seem to be growing faster because adding just a little bit of capital gives a big boom, but for countries that already have a lot of capital, there's relatively less boom. All right, so that's the idea of this chapter that we'll get more in depth into in class.